This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium-bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway To Shea Podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. It's a special bonus episode today, and I have the one, the only Tim Healey of Newsday joining the show. Tim, a lot going on in Port St. Lucie, and over the last, I want to say 5 days, the injury bug has really hit the Mets. We heard on Sunday, Francisco Alvarez is out with the injury to his hand. And now we hear about Jeff McNeil out 3 to 4 weeks with a strained right oblique. It seems that the Mets always get hit by this oblique injury. And this time it is to Jeff McNeil. He'll be reevaluated in 7 to 10 days to see if he can resume baseball activities. Tim, this is a tough break for McNeil. I know last season, his season got cut short because he fractured his right wrist, and he did come back during the NLCS, but it really wasn't to any avail there. It looks like he's changed his swing also during this spring. A lot more power we were seeing from him. What were your thoughts on this whole injury that just hit the Mets again now?
It's a bummer for the Mets, and it's a bummer for Jeff McNeil, who came into spring training about a month ago being very clear about what he wanted. And what he wanted was a hot camp. He wanted to hit the ground running and have a good Grapefruit League season and carry that into the regular season, because he thought in his prior best years, that's what he did. Hit well in spring training, hit well in real games once they come. He'll still sort of have that chance, but he won't get to play as many spring training games as he wanted. He's going to have to go on a little bit of a rehab assignment probably before he comes back. So 3 to 4 weeks, not the end of the world, especially when the season is still 2 weeks away. But it's not ideal, obviously, for McNeil or for the Mets.
He has the same injury that Sean Manaea is going through right now. Is it a little bit different for a hitter compared to a pitcher? I know there's a lot of movement, especially with the swing. Is it a little bit different in the time frame of return and recovery?
It's different for the different pitchers and hitters, yes. In terms of time frame, it's all about severeness, and both guys seem to be on a low-grade version of an oblique strain. Jeff McNeil especially so. Sean Manaea was low, maybe verging on medium based on how long he's been out or how long he will be out. Think of it this way. McNeil suffered the injury 2 weeks after Manaea and will probably be back before Sean Manaea. So part of that's because Jeff McNeil was a hitter and Sean Manaea is a pitcher. And once Manaea is cleared, which he is now, he started throwing a couple days ago, he has to basically redo spring training, restart the clock, 6 weeks minimum. So Sean Manaea, the news has been good, but he's still looking at probably mid to late April.
We're going to get into Sean Manaea in just a little bit. Going on with this continued injury with Jeff McNeil, possible replacements. I know Carlos Mendoza, we've known for a while now that kind of final roster spot for the lineup, I guess, the hitters, Luis Angel Acuna and Brett Beatty were kind of the final two that were battling for one spot. Now there's 2 spots available. And they both have a big opportunity to make this team, especially with Madrigal being out for the season. Mendoza also mentioned Donovan Walton and Luis De Los Santos as well. Which do you think comes to the roster on opening day? Which 2 do you think will be with the Mets? Is it the easy choice?
What's that?
Is it the easy choice that we're all thinking about?
I think it's the easy choice. I thought Brett Beatty was going to be the guy when there was 1 spot. And now I think it'll be Beatty and Acuna now that there's 2 spots, including everyday at-bats for one of them or some combination therein. When it was just the utility infielder spot looking to replace Nick Madrigal, who, of course, was looking to replace Jose Iglesias, the knock against Beatty, of course, was that he didn't play shortstop. And can you carry Brett Beatty as the utility infielder when he is a third baseman who's sort of plays second, but definitely doesn't play shortstop? And the answer was, yeah, they could probably swing that if they wanted to. Now, with one of Acuna, Walton, and De Los Santos also virtually guaranteed to make the roster, you're going to have a backup shortstop. So it makes Beatty's path to the roster much easier and, barring unforeseen circumstances, almost a given, in my opinion. I do think the other spot will go to Acuna, and he also benefits from this McNeil injury because previously it was only the backup spot. And Acuna is 23 years old, was not very good in AAA last year. He is still at a stage of his career and a stage of his prospecthood where he needs to play every day, whether that's in the majors or the minors. You can't carry him and play him off the bench, at bat here or there, start once or twice a week. That wouldn't work for who Acuna is right now. Now that there's a lot more at bats to be had, Acuna is back in the major league picture, and I think he'll be there. I don't know who will get most of the reps at second base. That might depend on what the next 2 weeks look like, how those guys are hitting coming out of spring training, going into the regular season. But defensively, obviously, the Mets are big, big fans of Acuna at second base, among other spots, but second base very much included. So he has that going for him in this new sort of subplot competition against Brett Baty.
And with Brett, it did feel like obviously he wasn't going to start, even if he made the roster with McNeil playing second. You have Vientos at third. He would come off the bench, be that utility type guy. But now that the fact that McNeil is out, I still don't know if him and Acuna both make it. It does seem kind of hard. You mentioned that Acuna should be playing every day. It does feel like there's an opportunity for Acuna to still be the starting second baseman with Brett Baty backing him up, even though Brett Baty has had a strong spring.
Yeah, it's totally possible. With Acuna and his playing time, I think I probably spoke too concretely about playing literally every day, but even with the reserve role and the starting job at second base now up for grabs, even if Acuna ends up playing 50% of the time, 75% of the time, I still think there's something to be gained there. So I don't think Acuna, if he's on the roster, necessarily will play literally every game. I still think Brett Baty would get his chances, but the Mets probably will take that as it comes, because if one guy's hitting and one guy's not, they're probably going to have to go with the guy who's hitting. Defense be damned.
We know that if the Mets were to lose Francisco Lindor or Alonso, Soto, that the dynamic changes drastically. But when you look at this lineup right now, even with the loss of McNeil and Francisco Alvarez, I still think that they have a chance to be a good lineup. Now I look at the lineup and this is what I'm assuming that it's going to be, with Lindor starting off, Soto, Alonso, Vientos, and Nimmo. I think was said that they could split time in the fourth spot, depending on if it's a lefty or righty pitcher. Starling Marte, Jesse Winker 6. Siri, I guess, moves all the way up to 7 now, with Baty, Acuna 8th, and Torrens 9. What is your thought on the lineup? I think this still could be a somewhat decent lineup.
Yeah, I think it could totally be a decent lineup still. I would bet Nimmo is cleanup most days and Vientos is fifth most days, at least to start the season. Again, that will depend in part on the handedness of the pitcher that night, the opposing pitcher, that is. But even though the Mets have lost 2 starting position players in the last few days, both those guys are batting in the bottom third of the lineup. So the Mets still have all of their big guns, that big top 5, potential top 6, depending on if that Winker-Marte platoon is as productive as the Mets think it can be. So the Mets will miss Alvarez, especially behind the plate. The Mets will miss McNeil for however long he is out, but they should still score plenty of runs. The one thing I see in your lineup there is Siri all the way up to 7. I don't know, because, yes, Luis Torrens doesn't provide much at the plate. Brett Baty, Acuna, we'll see. But at least with a fuller group, the Mets like the idea of Siri batting 9th to make him that sort of second leadoff hitter, which you hear sometimes about a guy who's fast and maybe your more traditional leadoff hitter from 15, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago. So I'll be curious to see if maybe they stick with Siri, who batted under 200 last year, in the 9th spot.
Yeah, especially with the speed that he provides. Definitely nice little 1-2 punch at the top of the order. Would you have Siri there and Francisco Lindor? Now moving on to Sean Manaea, who was also dealing with the right oblique strain. Clear to throw following his MRI. Everything came out clean. Mendy said he was symptom-free. He played catch on Tuesday. And, he still has to go through, like you said, a full spring training. I think that they said that he's going to be, practicing from, 72 from the mound, 120 to get him going and to get him ramped up. To me, he doesn't even really have to rush because April's the 1 month where the Mets have a ton of days off and the 5-man rotation is not going to get too crazy.
Yeah, that's well put. I don't think the Mets by any means will rush Sean Manaea. Like I mentioned, he's probably looking in that mid to late April time frame. As long as this continues to progress the way the Mets expect, which so far it has. But yeah, they have, I think, 3 off days in their first 8 days or something like that in their first 8 games. So the rotation-wise, there's probably not a ton of depth there right now, but they should be able to get by for those couple of weeks, maybe few weeks until Manaea gets back. So definitely not a good injury, but definitely not a death knell either.
Is there kind of I know we're still 2 weeks away, but are we kind of getting a sense of what this back end of the rotation is going to look like? I know Paul Blackburn struggled, had a great start his last time out. Tyler McGill has been very good. Griffin Canning has been very good. Are the Mets going to carry all these guys and maybe one goes to the bullpen?
Well, we know they'll have Canning and Griffin because those guys are on guaranteed contracts. The question mark is McGill. Would the Mets rather send McGill to the minors and have him be the next guy up when they inevitably need somebody, whether somebody gets hurt, whether they want to slot in a 6th starter come mid-April, or would they rather carry McGill in the rotation to begin the year and send, say, Paul Blackburn to the bullpen as a long man, and then he'll be that spot starter, 6th starter, long reliever kind of role, a role they really haven't had since Trevor Williams in 2022 when he was so good at it. So it's been a couple of years since the Mets have really had one of those. It kind of depends maybe on the state of AJ Minter and Dednail Nunez and their attempt to be ready for the start of the season. So the Mets still have some decisions to make there. The next couple of weeks will tell them a lot about how to make those decisions, but I'd be highly comfortable saying Canning's going to be in the rotation, and my bet right now is Blackburn will be too, but things can change.
And I think if you have to send Tyler McGill down, he's been through it every season. I think he's been through going up and down. So this wouldn't really affect him, but he's looked pretty good this spring. Going back to the lineup as we wrap up here, and, Brandon Nimmo made his return against Boston, batted second, playing DH, 1 for 3 with a single. I was thinking about this throughout the week. Do you think that this knee soreness has anything to do with the plantar fasciitis? Like, is he compensating for the knee with the foot injury?
I don't think so, because it's the other leg, and you never really know about the kinetic chain, so to speak, to call back to the Brody Van Wagen and Jed Lowry days about how it's all connected and one part of the leg and body will affect and impact another part. So it's possible, I guess. It is interesting that after such a healthy couple of years, 150 games each of the past 3 seasons, he's had the foot and then the knee back to back like this. So it's interesting, especially as he moves into his 30s now. So I'm not confident that they're related, but it seems worth monitoring, see what, if anything else, pops up in the coming months and years.
Outside of the injuries, it really feels like this is on par for Nimmo to kind of start spring like around this time. This is usually the time he starts getting into games, doesn't he?
Yeah, I think at this point now we're in mid-March. It's a little later than it had been or than he wanted to. But he said a couple of weeks ago when this knee soreness first popped up that he played as early as he did, February 28th, to build in some time for potential soreness with the body reacting to, in whatever way that it did. It ended up being the knee, ended up being a little soreness. He needed the gel injection. So it's not as if they expected it necessarily, but they wanted to account for the possibility. So it sounds like they pretty much nailed it, because here he is back in the lineup, and barring more issues, that he should be very much ready for the start of the season.
I showed you the lineup earlier with Marte and Winker being that DH, but, looking at Nimmo playing DH today, could we see a little more of Nimmo at DH this season and maybe Marte, Winker left field, probably McNeil as well?
It's certainly possible. It depends on how Brandon Nimmo's body responds, and if he continues to have trouble, then they'll probably look to give him those quote unquote half days off as the designated hitter. I think with Jesse Winker getting most of the time at DH, since he'll be facing right-handed pitchers, it'd be very easy to say put Winker in left, Nimmo at DH on a given day. With Marte, I'm less confident in his defensive ability because he hasn't played left field in a long time. He has a bad knee himself, among other bad parts of the leg. So he's very much feeling his 36 years at this point, it seems. The one thing he can still do is hit left-handed pitching, which is what the Mets want him to do. So I don't know how much time we're going to see Marte in the outfield. They'll have to take it as it comes as far as his physical capabilities.
Tim, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. Let everyone know what you're working on. I know you have residence this month in Port St. Lucie, so let everyone know what you got coming up.
Yeah, well, I'm down in Port St. Lucie for the whole time, so every day we'll have stories, or at least one story from Port St. Lucie and Mets spring training at newsday.com/Mets. I, of course, am also on Twitter at Tim B. Healey. That's TIM, B as in boy, HEALEY. And I don't want to say too much, but the next couple of days in particular, I have some what I think are really fun, exclusive stories lined up about current Mets and potential future Mets down in the minor leagues. So keep an eye out on all those platforms.
Well, I definitely can't wait, and Mets fans should be following you if they're not doing so already. Tim Healey, Mets beat writer for Newsday. As he said, follow him on X at Tim B. Healey. You can follow me on the Subway To Shea podcast on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway To Shea. You can follow me personally at Ant Rivera 86. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you like to listen. And if you want to be a part of the show and the live streams, you can go on YouTube and hit the subscribe button. But that wraps it up here for a special bonus episode of the Subway To Shea podcast. For Tim Healey, for me, Anthony Rivera, you've been listening to Subway To Shea. Always remember, let's go Mets.